So this discussion will be about uh, how to find the spiritual in the tangible, or how do we find the connection between the material and the spiritual. And if I'm going to start, I think that basically the main point really is that the material is spiritual, in the sense that there is this, I'm coming from, there's this statement from the Jesuit tradition that says, finding God in all things. That's the phrase, finding God in all things. How do we find God in all things? How do we find the divine in all things? There's this beautiful verse that I remember um, from the Book of Kings. And just a little background, because I come from a Catholic spirituality, so that's what I've been raised with. But if you wanna substitute the word God with cosmic intelligence, universal intelligence, infinite intelligence, the universe, the spirit, it's kind of similar. Naman. It's similar. I'm sure that a lot of people would say that it's not exactly the same, but to me, it's all representing that higher aspect of man. So there's this phrase, and I'm going to quote it directly because I wrote it down here. And he said, "Go forth and stand on the mountain before the Lord, and behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind passed by the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice." That's where we are. And that's where we find, when we sit down and ground ourselves and be still, that's when we hear the voice of the divine. It could be the voice of the divine within, or the voice of the divine outside, from the beyond. Because as above, so below, as within, so without, it's the same thing. Where do we draw the line between the inside world and the outside world? The body, but the body is part of the outside world. The body is part of the world, you know? And I think part of the beauty of, I'm going to connect this to astrology, because part of the beauty of astrology is that we see patterns of things, of celestial body, of heavenly bodies, making a difference on the earth. As in, the moon affects the tides, the sun nourishes the plants and makes them grow. So we can see astrology as a way to remind ourselves that, hey, we are part of the world. So we're also affected by the heavenly bodies, by the planetary systems. And whether or not astrology can actually predict events, I'm not sure. I can't say for sure. Whether or not it echoes the patterns of human behavior, I'm not so sure either. But it's a good way to remind ourselves, if you believe in that sort of thing, it's a good way to remind ourselves that we are part of a larger thing, of this mythic drama of heroes, old gods, stars, and the entire cosmic mechanism that is intelligent and that was intelligently designed. So I think that's the beauty. And I think that's something that we have to remind ourselves, because even us, when we look out into the world, we are the world looking at us. How can you observe the world if there is nothing to be observed? And how can the world be observed if there's no observer? And that's something that even in physics is also realized, in that the position of the observer also affects the thing that is observed. In that way, we realize that we are part of the world, and we are part of the thing being observed. And that's a huge part of research as well. I'm coming from the field of psychology, and the researcher is part of the research, in the sense that they have to recognize what we call the reflexivity, or something, or how their inner beliefs and how the context they were raised affects their interpretation of the events. And this is something that's also very important within the spiritual collective, within the esoteric community or the New Age community, however you want to call it, is something that we have to recognize as well, that we are part of what we are observing. So it's important to recognize how we're observing and what interpretations we're coming from, what the context of our history is, so that we know how to interpret properly the things around us. And this one, connecting this time to astrology, to tarot readings. Tarot symbols are representations of universal ideas. So these ideas reflect the projections of our own inner wisdom. So if you're going to, for example, if you're a tarot reader and you start reading the tarot and you start reading the images in the tarot, if you're not in the right space or clarity, you're only going to be reading for yourself. It's only going to be projecting yourself, because that's what you need to hear. It's coming out. If you start to read for others, there is a clarity that's needed to read the tarot for you to bring clarity out of it. Does that make sense? So
yeah, definitely.
Diba?
So I've been ruminating on, because well, you're practicing tarot and you're knowed with the archetypes of the tarot, and I'm practicing astrology, albeit it's shamanic and esoteric astrology, but it's still archetypal, and I tie it and I blend it with archetypal psychology. And what we're learning as space holders is like that, exactly what you said, that reflexivity and the art of mirroring. And what I've been ruminating for this whole year since I've been coming out with my practice is this empty fullness, or this empty wholeness, wherein we are holding space. So in as much we are empty, but we are full and whole within the context of love, in the context of that space.
yes, what is a room but not the space between the walls, right? So it's the space that makes a thing a thing. What is a picture but not the space that it contains, or
The
that
container,
contains
yeah.
it, right? That's, I think, also the beauty of when we start to think about the duality of things. There's no way to recognize one thing without it being contrasted with another thing that you can recognize. Light and darkness, there's no way to say that something is bright if you don't know what darkness is, or you can't say that it's dark if you don't know what light is. Same with day and night, joy and sorrow, comfort and discomfort. And I think part of a serious, grounded spirituality is to remind yourself that both of these things are part of the worldly experience, or the experience that we have in the world. So that's something that, we have to also recognize as well. When people say that pain is an illusion, I think that sometimes we say that to help ourselves go through something really difficult, and I understand that. But at the same time, pain is important to recognize because it's part of the experience and it's part of the human experience. There's no way to know what comfort is if we don't know what discomfort is, or we don't know what health is if we've never gotten sick. You notice how when we get sick, we always remember that, I took for granted the way I breathed when I was healthy. Like if your nose is clogged, that's the only time you actually think about, I was able to breathe clearly when I was healthy. So there's that
You have a reference
contrast.
point.
Exactly, a reference point, a contrast between two things. So comfort and discomfort are both poles. There's this principle in the Hermetic philosophy, the Hermetic principles, the principle of polarity. All things are dual, but different, are only different in degree.
Mm.
So meaning one thing towards the other, or one thing, another thing towards the other, and there's no way to know that there's another pole if you didn't know that there's another pole. So that's, both of them are part of the same experience.
Mm.
And pain and sorrow and discomfort are part of feeling pleasure, happiness, comfort. And
Yeah.
both of that, when we start to ground ourselves and really experience it,
Yeah. So
that's,
it's nice that you brought up the poles and polarity. Because exactly when you were speaking, what came to mind was really, but we are in Earth. And Earth as a planet is being held together by the North and the South Pole. And we know that the Earth is not vertical. So this is astronomy. We know that the Earth is not vertical. It tips along its axis at around 22 degrees. And what's holding that into its axis is, again, the magnetic poles. And it's just the gravity, and the energetic vibration it's like a torus, if you're into quantum
yeah.
physics, that it folds and expands within itself. It opens and then it closes, and it's all the same thing. And within that is the cross of matter, which is like the ecliptic, or the celestial equator, that's horizontal and intersects with the poles. And what comes to mind is exactly that. In Jungian psychology, it's holding the tension of the opposites, right? It's always things in earth, things in life is always moving towards equilibrium. It's finding that sense of center, or finding that sense of alignment, but it just presupposes that we are not in center. And life is always a cultivation of what it means to be in center, what it means to be grounded, what it means to be holding the polarity and the duality, but also understanding that yes, there are two. It's dimension, so two measures, but then there's only one variable. There's not two variables. Like we just think that it's two variables, like the tail and the head, light and shadow, but it's just one. It's the same coin. So yeah, so
It's actually,
going back to the duality of pain and pleasure and loneliness in in a world filled and struck by grief. And when you're in the middle of that darkness and in the middle of that chaos, these are words, these are fluffy, beautiful words
yes.
that yes can inspire the spirit, but when you're in the middle of it, how can you find anchor?
When we, I remember this, I'm getting this from a movie, actually. I just forgot what the title was, but it said, character said, when we pray for patience, we don't get patience, we get opportunities that we can use to be patient. So it's these things. When we pray for certain things, we get the opportunities to do them. When we're looking for a way to ground ourselves, and when we pray for grounding, we don't get grounding. We get opportunities to ground ourselves. And when we pray for, it's the same thing when we pray for, and part of manifestation, I think, when we pray for fortune or love, we don't get it immediately. We get opportunities for fortune, for love, for whatever. And those things are part of the experience itself. Give me a sec. Yeah, it's so breezy here that it's so, I just feel swept away. But yeah, so I had a thought when you said centering. I want to ask, like, where is the center? Like, when you look at a ball, for example, what is the center of the sphere? It's where you're looking. It's where you are. So I think if you want to center yourself, it's where you are, right? And that's part of also grounding, is starting where you are. And all these,
Acknowledging where you are at the moment, as
exactly,
it
where are
is,
you?
exactly as it is, without
Yeah.
forcing, without changing any outcome, but just acknowledging here and now as now is.
Exactly. And that is also part of uh, Stoic philosophy.
Mm,
It's Epictetus said in
mm,
the Enchiridion said, demand not that events happen as you wish, but with them to happen as they do happen, and you will go along well.
mm,
So don't force things. Don't try to expect that things are going to happen the way that you want them to happen. Let them happen. Expect that they would happen the way they do,
mm,
and you'll be fine. You'll be fine. And I think that's part of the trust we also have with the divine, is that another quote from the scriptures would say, uh, look at the birds in the sky, they don't harvest or store in barns, yet the Father feeds them. And are you not more than birds? And that, I think, is so beautiful. And when we look back at those philosophies, those ideas, and I know it's so difficult, exactly like you said, so difficult when you're in the moment, especially with so much injustice in the world and so much
mm,
suffering that we experience. And there's that problem of suffering.
mm,
um, I don't want to say and go outright. Obviously, when someone just experienced a loss, it's kind of insensitive to go up to them and say, "Oh, it all happens for a reason,"
mm.
or "This is part of the great purpose." That's really insensitive.
And we
What
can
is
say it's bypassing, right?
Yeah,
In our
exactly.
practice.
So what do? You sit with them,
Mm,
be where they are, be with them where they are. And that, again, that goes back to what we were saying, be with the experience. And when we're comforting someone, um, we often say, when someone is sad, we always say, uh, oh, come on, be happy, or just be happy, or just don't think about it. And these things are not experiencing the thing as it is.
mm,
Because when things happen as they are, then we are aligned with the world,
mm.
right?
But human nature and neuroscience dictates that 70% of the time, our perception dictates reality more than what reality actually is. And,
Definitely.
perceptions, bringing into, our filters. You mentioned earlier, our filters based on our conditions, our subconscious programming, whether they're conscious or not, it's still our programming, right? And it's still our conditioned background. It's our cultural background. It's everything up to this moment, who we are, at least who we know ourselves to be, and the identity constructs, and even the belief patterns, and the perception patterns that we hold until this moment dictates our perception of everything else. And you said it, as within, so without, and we're a
Exactly.
mirror of everything.
I want to say something about that, because that's actually really what the great psychologist William James also said, that all experiences that we have are experiences that we have inside of us.
Mm,
So whether or not something exists in reality, for example, when we experience a religious experience, whether or not there are such a thing as spirits, God, entities, angels, we're going to experience it as real if we believe that it's real.
mm, mm,
All our experiences are within.
mm,
They're all within. And there's no way to experience the world if there's no one experiencing the world. And I'm going back to my earlier point when I said that there's nothing to be observed if there's no observer.
The relationship with our environment.
Exactly. We're part of the environment. And there's no way for the environment to exist as it is if there's no one there to experience it.
Mm.
And remember that old thing that people always say, what's the sound of a tree falling in the forest if no one's there to
If
hear
there
it?
was, yeah,
If there's no one there to hear it, there's no sound.
it just
That's the
doesn't make a
answer.
sound. Yeah.
Because the person, the individual, the listener is the one who hears or makes the sound. It's
Mm,
not the tree that's falling, it's the person experiencing it that
mm,
makes the sound, that hears the sound, that makes sound exist.
mm,
And that's that's a reminder that we are part of the larger world.
Mm.
And all of this is part of us. And all of this is experienced within us.
Okay. So if I were to wrap up, your point is about the duality of sadness and joy. But these are emotions, right? These are emotions. It's finding center, it's finding the tension of the opposites, and acknowledging that it's all part of the human experience. And it's our perception, or rather the meaning that we put into the experience, how we brand it, how we label it, the emotions that we put and charge into these emotions make all the difference. But at the end of the day, it's part of our evolutionary journey as beings on Earth.
Yes.
Because we are part of the whole, and these experiences are part of being in the whole, although we experience it individually.
Yes. And I want to take it, okay, knowing all that being said, I want to take it just a little bit further, and then we could end just a little bit further. So what do we do about that? Knowing all that, what do we do about that? The answer is let them happen. Nothing. The answer is act naturally without, remember the exercise that we were doing earlier, without naming the sounds that are coming to you, just letting the sounds wash over you. And I'm talking about the individual personal experience. I'm talking about being centered and being grounded in where you are, is not trying to say anything about what's going on. It's just what's going on. Here it is. And that's the title of the course that I prepared, actually, is here it is.
Okay, I am fascinated because so I have a background in systems theory. I also have, I'm actually like a multidisciplinary, well, how do you call this? A multidisciplinarian. So it's,
Sure.
I blend a lot of disciplines. I blend a lot of practices, hard and soft sciences. So with systems theory and neuroscience, blending that with conscious rage, because I also practice shamanism and shamanic breathing. A practice in conscious rage, or conscious relating rather, is part of being conscious, is knowing and labeling what it is that you're going through. So that when you engage your prefrontal cortex, you can detach yourself from whatever it is that you just labeled and named, and know that that is a label. That is not you. That is not who you are. That is not part of you. It is part of your experience. But you are not the grief. You are not the sadness. You're not the loneliness. You're not the depression. These are feelings and emotions that can be feedback loops to whatever subconscious needs are needing to be, shown the light of awareness so that it can be healed. But there is process and there is shadow work. But then I digress. So this is a fascinating bodhisattva perspective to it, where you sit in it without, and also stoicism, like just sitting in it without really exerting any other effort than what is already there.
Yeah.
And just knowing that you are here, and then finding your center within it, which I always say, like being in the chaos without becoming it. So allowing the chaos to be chaos, or allowing it to be whatever it is without even trying to label it, because our human minds, sometimes in our brilliance, is also our downfall, because we're trying to label everything. We're trying to put some cognitive, something cognitive to experiences that are sometimes beyond cognition. But I guess human nature.
Exactly.
So this is interesting.
Exactly. So it's also called oh man, I forgot. Here I am labeling it again. Trying to label it, but it is experiencing things as they are. That's essentially what it is. I mean, where are you, and what is it? Here it is. What is the it? This, all this is it. And where you are is is where we start.
Mm.
And with that, we end this conversation, we end this discussion, and we continue it in a course on grounded spirituality, where we dive deeper into the ideas and concepts, and find a way to really reconnect not only with ourselves but also with the world.
Mm.